So our moderator for today is Bretta Sweetman. Bretta is a social scientist with NOAA's Office for Coastal Management at the National Water Center in Alabama. Her work focuses on integrating social science to support sound decision-making to address coastal and water resource challenges with an emphasis on partnerships. In this role, she supports the NOAA Water Initiative and strives to better understand stakeholder data, tool, and information needs. She holds a Master's of Science in Geography from the University of Alabama and a Bachelor's of Arts in Environmental Studies and Spanish from the University of Pittsburgh. So without further ado, Bretta, please take it away.
Thank you, Mona. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to moderate our panel this afternoon focused on building resilience through equity and justice. Looking at local, regional, and national perspectives. I'm very excited to share that we have 3 experts with us today that will each bring some very unique perspectives to this discussion. Similar to our last panel format, we encourage you all to ask your questions throughout the chat. Keep it dynamic and interactive over the next hour. And so, I think that there was some good conversation in our last session that will really help kind of set the stage for this upcoming one. The pillars of justice, equity, diversity, inclusion have become increasingly important. And really looking forward to kind of hearing our perspectives today on how this work is currently and can be in the future incorporated into Georgia coastal management. So with that, I will go ahead and introduce our first panelist for today. We will go ahead and just have each speaker share some opening remarks, have some discussion questions as well, and open it up for you all. So at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce Makeda Okolo. Makeda is the Southeast and Caribbean Regional Lead for the National Ocean Services Office for Coastal Management. From this position, she co-founded the Southeast and Caribbean Environmental Justice Community of Practice with the National Wildlife Federation. She also contributes to a number of other diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice efforts across the agency. Prior roles for her include serving within NOAA's Deputy Undersecretary for Operations, Ben Friedman, the Office of Legislative and Intergovernmental Affairs. Prior to joining NOAA, she actually worked for 11 years working on Capitol Hill, where she served as Energy and Environmental Policy Advisor to Congresswoman Donna M. Christensen. And Makeda is also originally from St. Croix, the U.S. Virgin Islands. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Makeda, to kick us off.
Thank you so much, Bretta. I really appreciate it. And many, many thanks to Mona and the other organizers of today's panel discussion. I have been looking forward to this all week. I definitely, as much as I'm excited to be here, I've also wanted to hear from Nataki and Amara and hear their perspectives. But yes, as Bretta described, in the time that we have together, I want to share just some of my thoughts through my experience of starting the Environmental Justice Community of Practice, but also from the perspective of working in a federal agency that is really thinking hard about how we have been serving frontline communities up until this point. And as I know many of you around the Zoom room can imagine, right, there are many, many struggles just inherent to doing this well, especially. But I was really encouraged about a year ago when I participated in a community roundtable hosted by the National Wildlife Federation. What was so special about it was that it engaged so many partners in the Southeast, from the Carolinas down to Florida, talking really critically about equity and justice. But what was perhaps, what I really took away from it was this recognition that communities want to be included and they want to be a part of any decision that impacts where they work, where they live, or where their children play. And so basically since like the end of last year, we came together and we created an awesome forum where these discussions could continue to happen on a more regular basis. And we have brought together everyone from students to academia, the faith community, large and small green groups, state agencies, and grassroots community leaders as well. And the timing you know, while unfortunate on some ends, is also perfect, because we find the country at a space and time where these issues of racial injustice aren't just limited to those who've endured it for hundreds and hundreds of years, but we are seeing an awakening, if you will, from organizations, from academia, from federal and state government, thinking about how much more thoughtful we can be about the work that we're doing. Many of you probably have heard about the executive orders that the Biden-Harris administration enacted shortly after coming into office. And what that has done is really challenge the way that we think as federal workers, employees, agencies, and helps us to put a new lens on the work that we do. And that lens really focused in on equity and justice, which is good, right? Because it's almost, you know, granted us permission to confront our biases, to be humble, to think about issues that are sometimes difficult to confront and difficult to have. But out of all of that, I think the prayer and the hope is that we come up with new creative ways to be impactful, to be resilient, to have enduring, lasting impact, especially in coastal communities, which, as you know, are near and dear to my heart, being from a small island community. But back to the community of practice, I really want to share just a few lessons that we have already learned after being together for about 8 months. And, you know, the first is a really easy way to think about it, and that's nothing about us without us. And this is a slogan that was born and at the heart of disability activism in the 90s, but it's used to communicate this idea that no policy should ever be decided about people without the full and direct participation of members from that group. Right? So we cannot write a paper about a group of people and not have someone on that team, or not consult, not be thoughtful about it. Another is to think holistically. We cannot disassociate our agenda, whatever our focus is, from all of the other things, all the other pressures that communities face. Sometimes it's almost alluring to kind of stick our heads in the sand and say, you know what, I'm only going to focus on this specific question, right? But we know that that's not the way humans operate. It's not the way that we work. And one way to kind of jump that hurdle is to think about partnerships, right? Are we being uncomfortable, right? And if we're too comfortable, if we're talking to the same faces around the room, then that probably tells you that you're not working to the maximum of your extent, right? And we know as scientists, we have the capability, we have the power, we have the ingenuity. And I say about NOAA, you know, we research everything from the depths of the ocean to the outer atmosphere, right? So there's no reason why we can't use that same power, that same ingenuity to do right by communities. Another point is to think of inclusion and diversity as action words. These are not taglines. They should not be considered as convenient for the moment, right? But these should be baked into our ethos, into the way that we do our work. And in doing so, we have to consider and think about the terminology that we use, right? A lot of times we kind of throw around words like vulnerable community or the underserved, right? But who has underserved them, right? So we have to kind of take that onus and be honest and transparent about, we have historically as agencies and as entities, we have not done right by people. And so we need to right that wrong, if you will. And one way to do that is thinking about return on investment, right? So oftentimes we think about return on investment in terms of the return that we can get on our research dollars, or we can get on the federal investment. But we also have to think about, what are we leaving behind with communities after we have, you know, talked to them and extracted information and done so much to make our product that much better? What are you do? How are you leaving that community better off, right? That's sort of my challenge for everyone who's listening. And so I want to pause, because what I'm really here for is the discussion and the questions. But before that, I definitely want to say that if you're ever interested in hearing from community leaders, and also, you know, just all parts of the Southeastern Caribbean, and you want to kind of know what we're talking about, be a part of the discussion, offer something that would be useful to our discussion, please feel free to join us. You can reach out to me, makeda.okolo@noaa.gov. And I'd be happy to add you to our listserv. So with that, I will pause for now and make space for our other wonderful speakers that are going to follow me. Thanks, Brenna.
Thank you so much, Makeda, for sharing those thoughts. Next, we are going to hear from Amara Davis. Amara serves as a communications specialist and Knaus Fellow with the National Sea Grant Office. She's also worked with the Schmidt Ocean Institute as a science communications intern and the Bahamas Ministry of Tourism as a communications executive. Amara is completing her Master of Science degree at Savannah State University, where she's studying the effects of temperature on viral load in spiny lobsters, and holds a Bachelor's of Science in Marine Sciences from Savannah State University as well. With that, I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Amara.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm honored to be here. I think as the newest person on the panel to enter into this world, I think my position as a fellow and also sitting in the National Sea Grant Office, I get to see a lot of the work that's happening not only on a national level, but also in the state and local communities. And with my communications background, it's important to me that we are continually amplifying the voices of the communities that we are serving. Because like Makeda said, we can't move forward and leave these groups of people behind. We can't do the work if these people aren't included. So I think while we're having this panel today, my approach will be coming from how I'm learning and navigating through this space and finding my voice. Where do I step in? What am I taking from the things that we're learning, and how then do we apply this to the newer generations coming in? How do we make action from the work that's already being done? And there's a lot of work, a lot of foundation to build on, but we still have quite a long way to go, and we need to be very deliberate in the way that we make those steps so that we are always being included, always being inclusive of the communities that we're working with. So I'm keeping it super short and sweet so we can continue to move. Thank you.
Thank you, Amara. Next, we are going to hear from Nataki. Nataki is, just 1 second here. Dr. Nataki Osborne-Jelks is an assistant professor in the Environmental and Health Sciences program at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Jelks investigates urban environmental health disparities, the role that place, race, and social factors play in influencing health, cumulative risk assessment, the impact of climate change on vulnerable populations, and the connection between urban watersheds, pollution, the built environment, and health. She also develops and implements and evaluates community-based initiatives that set conditions to enable low-income and communities of color to empower themselves to reduce exposure to environmental health hazards and improve health and overall quality of life. She is also particularly interested in approaches that engage environmentally overburdened communities in monitoring local conditions, generating actionable data for community change, and developing effective community-based interventions that revitalize toxic, degraded spaces into healthy places. And I will turn it over to you, Dr. Jelks.
Thank you so much, Bretta. And it's an honor to sit on this panel along with Makeda and Amara. So thank you for the invitation to be here today. So in addition to my role at Spelman College, I also lead the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance, which is a community-based environmental justice organization that works to grow a cleaner, greener, healthier, and more sustainable West Atlanta. Wawa, as we call it, serves low wealth and communities of color in 3 watersheds, the Proctor, Utoy, and Sandy Creek watersheds. These make up most of Northwest and Southwest Atlanta. These are all tributaries to the Chattahoochee River, and these communities are overburdened with environmental stressors, but are often least represented at environmental decision-making tables. We were established really as a result of community efforts to halt discriminatory wastewater treatment practices in West Atlanta. So as I think about many of the things that Makeda talked about in terms of, if you're doing something or building something or creating something, for the community without the community, then, it really isn't for them. And in this case, our community had no idea that our local municipality was going to take one of our city parks and establish essentially a mini wastewater treatment plant. And so the community got together and mobilized and ultimately halted that project and pushed the city to go into a different direction, to adapt what was called sort of a citizens plan to address and to deal with some of the issues around wastewater treatment, in the city. And so for over 20 years, we really have worked to help pioneer and to advance community-led watershed protection and restoration, environmental education, as well as environmental and climate justice in Northwest and Southwest Atlanta neighborhoods. For about 4 years, that 4-year time period just ended recently, Wawa served as the official Urban Waters Federal Partnership Ambassador for Atlanta's Proctor Creek watershed. The Urban Waters Federal Partnership Program is a program that was developed by EPA to reconnect urban communities in particular to its waterways, working to help those communities to, I guess, become better stewards, of local waterways, to try to restore those waterways, and to also help to remedy things that were happening in terms of economically distressed neighborhoods. It's supported by about 15 different federal agencies that work together in about 20 designated locations across the country. And so Atlanta has one of those locations in the Proctor Creek watershed. And so through the work that I and my colleagues have done, we've worked with residents in the Proctor Creek watershed, and for over 20 years, I called this watershed home. And so we've worked to help improve the health of our water, while also addressing some critical issues and priorities in the community. So things like, urban flooding, for instance, working to make sure that we have clean water and thriving, waterfronts. And this is particularly important because these waterfronts, these stream corridors flow through our front yards, our backyards, our school grounds, and public parks. And so while Atlanta is not a coastal community, we're all connected. From the creeks to the coast, the oceans and the seas, whether we're talking about inland or coastal communities, we are all being impacted by climate change. Just as down on the coast here in Atlanta, our waterways are plagued with pollution. We are seeing and feeling the effects of flooding, of erosion, land loss, displacement, loss of material property, economic devastation, as well as poor health outcomes that are associated with the impacts of climate change. And again, while we are not coastal, we work a lot with folks on the coast. So I heard on the tail end of the earlier conversation a mention of Dr. Mildred McLean and Harambe House and Citizens for Environmental Justice in Savannah, Georgia, key partners of ours, and quite frankly, mentors of ours. There are folks down on Sapelo Island, as well as in the Gullah Islands off the coast of South Carolina as well. Folks like Queen Quet, which I'm sure maybe some folks here, are familiar with her work in terms of coastal restoration on St. Helena Island and other places, off the coast of South Carolina. So we're all networked and working together, collaboratively, and in many cases learning, from what's happening, in the coastal areas. But I guess as I close, what I will just try to put sort of a fine point on is that when we talk about working in coastal areas, as we talk about trying to address, many of the impacts of climate change, whether we're talking about coastal areas or not, we have to, if we're using this justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion lens, we have to be working collaboratively with communities. That work doesn't happen in a way that is really sustainable without those communities. There was a mention earlier about, resilience. And there was a point that a close colleague and friend, Dr. Erica Holloman Hill, posted that, when we talk about the baseline, when we talk about resilience, we always talk about, being able to bounce back from these shocks and stresses. And so she put in the chat that the baseline for communities of color in most cases, for low to moderate income communities in most cases, that baseline is inequitable. So when we talk about these issues of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in the context of climate change and climate resilience, then we have to recognize and acknowledge that resilience is not necessarily enough. It's the buzz term that we use, but if we're talking about going back to status quo, that is not enough for communities who have been severely impacted, will continue to be impacted, will be hurt by sort of this multiplier effect of climate change. And so we have to go beyond resilience. It's not about survival. It's about how these communities can not just survive, but how can they thrive? And so I'll stop there and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Nataki, for sharing those remarks. I think that your final comments there at the end regarding the need to really partner with local communities, which I think all of our panelists hit on, are the perfect segue into the first question I would like to just pose to you all as our panelists. So we've kind of, heard the need that a JEDI mindset can really help address issues from inland to the coast. It's all connected. And so one thing I would like to hear from you all are what are some specific strategies for partnering with local communities on this work?
I can go. I was waiting on my other panelists since you just heard from me, but I can just kind of jump in and say a few things. I think it's important when we're talking about working with communities that we've got to share power. That's one of the first things. Whether we're coming from academic institutions, federal agencies, nonprofits, wherever we're coming from, if we're going to work effectively with communities, then we've got to share power. We've got to acknowledge the unique strengths and assets that those communities bring. We have to acknowledge and elevate local community knowledge, lived experience. It has to be a part of our research efforts. It has to be a part of our efforts to develop solutions, that are not only homegrown, but that can be owned and even implemented, by communities themselves. So I think that's really important. We've got to see them as equal partners in this work. And that includes making sure that there are adequate, more than sufficient resources available for communities to engage. A lot of times, those of us who have some ability, whether it's with our federal agency or, research grants that we might have, we are sort of, getting paid. We're on the clock, so to speak, in many cases, in terms of the work that we might do collaboratively with communities. And in too many instances, we look at communities and say, well, this is going to better their community. So, why should we really be concerned about the resources that folks have? They should want to do it, just to improve their communities. And we've got to get out of that sort of thinking and make sure that the resources are appropriate for those community organizations, entities, residents, to be meaningfully engaged in the collaborative work.
Right, I completely agree with you. I think that making sure that all the stakeholders have an equitable stake in the work that we're doing is super important. And it was mentioned in the earlier panel as well that all of that should be a consideration in the work that we do and not at the end when we're looking for validation or to say that we have worked with these communities. But at the very beginning, when we are planning, we should make the plans to include them and have their thoughts, their input in everything that we're doing. And when we're thinking about that, that does also require us to think about how we are going to allocate resources. And that needs to be built in. It shouldn't be, well, maybe I can find some honoraria for a speaker to come in and talk to us. No, if we're going to go in, we need to make that decision. We need to be deliberate about that. How do we allocate funding so that this community can implement the changes that we are suggesting? How do we train people to do the work that we are suggesting? And how does this move on after we have left or after this partnership has ended for what we were expecting it to do? All of that future planning needs to be considered when we're doing that work.
There's a really powerful point that Amara just kind of initiated that I want to pull a thread on, and that's this idea of building a pipeline, right? It's not so much that you're going to just come in, you're going to do the work that you need to do, you're going to have a few conversations, and then we're going to leave, right? Working with communities that have been traumatized, quite frankly, by science, by the federal government, by institutions, it's going to take time to build those trusted relationships, to get to a place where folks feel comfortable. And so you cannot go in being afraid of doing the hard work that's required. But if you're really, really serious about it, I think, another key is to make sure that there are opportunities for the youth that are a part of that community to engage, to be a part, so that, in generations to come, they are the ones that are helping to collaboratively be a part of the process from the very beginning. They're going to know the questions to ask, right? So yes, definitely wanted to just hone in on that point as well, Bretta. Thanks.
Thank you all so much for touching on that. I think that each of your perspectives provides lots of different insights on this topic, and I really appreciate y'all sharing that. So we do have a question here in the chat to Dr. Jelks. So grateful for the work Wawa has and is continuing to do. Can you please speak about the role of Wawa and other frontline organizations as a professional oasis for students of all walks of life to sharpen their community engagement skills while applying their scientific discipline?
Thank you for that question. And so, the work that Wawa does is very in community engaged, but we like to bring students along with us. We are based on the west side of Atlanta. So we are very close to the Atlanta University Center, where Spelman College is, Morehouse College, Clark Atlanta University, Morris Brown College, Morehouse School of Medicine, and a seminary. And so we have at points partnered with, engaged, trained, and deployed, into work in the community, students from all of those institutions, as well as, schools like Georgia Tech and Georgia State, Emory, even as far as Mercer and Kennesaw State University. And the work that we do is not necessarily unique, as was referenced in the question. There are, other groups, down on the coast, like, again, Citizens for Environmental Justice in Harambe House in Savannah, Georgia, like Queen Quet and the Gullah Geechee Nation in South Carolina. Other groups are doing this work as well. They are engaging with students, really giving students this opportunity to have a deep dive, to work in community, to partner with community residents, to learn from them, and to also bring their scientific skills and research skills to the work as well. And so it's important for us to not only engage students by using their scientific skills and helping them to build those, but we also think that it's critically important as we have the next researchers, natural resource professionals, environmental scientists, whoever they are going to be, in their lives after, college or after graduate school. We think that it's important that they get this exposure to working with communities, that they, develop their own lenses in which they can analyze issues around, what justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and bring this to the table in terms of, what they're going to do, in their future careers. So we're just, very engaged in that work, and making sure that, students have real experiences that give them unique perspective, as well as, unique experiences that they can build on in terms of developing those relationships with communities and, collaboratively, working in many ways, under the leadership, of community residents who are, at the forefront of, working collaboratively, with us to solve community problems.
Thank you so much, Nataki. It sounds like a common theme here is really engaging across all different ages. Makeda touched on engaging the youth for community development efforts, community engagement. It sounds like at the college level as well, really kind of thinking intergenerationally here as another approach to, shifting our mindset and incorporating that JEDI lens into our work. And so, one topic I kind of want to dive a little deeper as we wait for other questions to spark among our audience is, thinking about navigating here across our local to national scale. Sometimes I know that there are major challenges in these different groups within government, within different agencies. One question I want to ask is what are some ways that we can, better work across these different organizational barriers, and what might be some strategies to overcome these challenges?
One thing that has been pretty encouraging is that the White House has put together what it's called WEJAC, the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. And what I really love about the fact that the White House is leading this effort is that they're not just relying on those immediately next to them. They've done a pretty good job of looking across the nation and saying, okay, hey, who are the grassroots leaders? Who are the folks that are in the places that represent the nation, from a wide cross-section of diversity, and bringing those voices and helping them to be a part of the discussion. That's one thing that I'm seeing that I'm encouraged by. Of course, I'm also seeing, a number of conversations that are happening on an ongoing basis, not just with our community of practice, but I'm seeing the National Wildlife Federation, I'm seeing the National Academies of Sciences, all working collaboratively to think through how can we be more thoughtful and more impactful about these issues. And so it's really, like you're saying, working across spectrums is what's going to be required. It's also just a matter of us being mindful of those nuances that are inherent to that, right? Understanding that, some of these relationships are going to take some time to build. But I think if we give space and we are welcoming and say, hey, there is a seat at this table for everyone, I think that makes it a whole lot easier for folks to join in.
I think that's absolutely correct. And I think for Sea Grant in particular, what is really interesting is that we have that national level view, but also have the state programs that share their views. And we do also have communities of practice throughout that, two of which are the DEIJ community of practice and also the TLK, the traditional knowledge community of practice. And what I find really interesting about that is that it's more than conversation. It's more than we have said that we support these groups. It's here is the product of these discussions. These are our action plans, and these are the ways in which we want to implement them. And I think that having diversity, equity, inclusion as a guiding principle makes doing the work a bit easier, because then you are thinking about it in everything that you do, and it trickles down. So if we are making it a priority at the national office, then it becomes a priority also, and in most cases was already a priority for the state programs, and they share it with the local communities, and we can then feed into each other as we move forward.
It's interesting, as a part of a conversation recently, one of our senior leaders said, show me your budget and I'll tell you your priorities, right? And so kind of following up on that, Amara, it gets to that point. It's, yes, working across the spectrum, but those who do have the power, who do have the resources, have to make sure that it's very boldly and affirmatively positioned, so that we know that there is a long-lasting commitment, right? I mean, one thing that communities that are overstretched and overextended don't need is for false hope, or for them to, begin to invest, right? Because they're taking away time from their families, from their side businesses, from their church, from whatever it is that brings them joy, to focus on what we're asking them to engage in, right? So we have to make sure that there's commitment and they know that we can be dependent upon, and that's a really, really big factor to make sure that we center and focus on.
Thank you, Amara and Makeda. It sounds like both of you kind of touched on having guiding principles and guidance from higher up can really help be one way to have information and practices start to trickle down from that national to local level. Really appreciate that. All right, and just a reminder, we welcome questions in our chat. Don't be shy. I know we're coming to the end of the day, but really we want to take advantage of having our speakers here. Are there specific items that they have touched on that you think could be applied to your work? Please feel free to chime in at any time. In the meantime, I will go ahead and continue to start to pick their brains while we have, it looks like we do have a comment here. Jennifer Sweeney-Tukes, for people in this webinar who may not generally work collaboratively with the people in the communities where they research, do you have any ideas or suggestions for first steps they can take? It's a great question.
We're also polite. I keep where I'm like, no, I want to see who's gonna talk first. I feel like we may have touched on this a little bit, but it's thinking. I think mapping out the community is something that you should consider doing. When you think about your work, think about who will be touched by your work, right? And think about it in a very open and dynamic way. We may look at a flooding issue, right, and see that it's close to a church, and immediately sort of think about going to like the local public works agency, right? What about talking to the church, right? And the church will then point you in other directions. So I love the concept of connecting with like community lifelines, where people really engage. But finding trusted sources in the community. So yes, of course, your local planners and local academia are going to be places where you'll naturally go. But think about hospitals, think about clinics, think about cultural groups and organizations. Like I said, think about churches, think about schools. I think just having a few conversations about your work, getting perspectives by those that may have done something similar as well in the past, are definitely ways to get started. And of course, you have to be a little judicious with your time because we don't have, all the time and all the resources, but at least commit yourself to talking to at least a few partners that you would consider non-traditional, if you will. Get their feedback, really seek to understand and know the community, know their pressures, try to understand how they have reacted to other research endeavors in the past, right? So that you're not going in blind, right? Ultimately, your goal is to be successful, to have sustainable impact. And that's the only way that you're really going to do it, is by taking that look back and then using that guidance to kind of chart your way ahead.
If I could just add briefly to that, I was going to say almost the same thing that Makeda said in terms of, this asset mapping, where and who are the assets in a local community. Sometimes we, when communities are challenged, whether we're talking about the impacts of climate change or, other, things that are negatively impacting communities, we might look at them through the lens of deficits. This community, as Makeda was even saying earlier, this community is underserved. This community is vulnerable because of X, Y, and Z. And so we tend to see sometimes those communities through that deficit lens, but fail to recognize and acknowledge the assets that are in in those communities as well. So the churches, how is the community organized? Is there a local, community or neighborhood-based organization that takes on a leadership role, on certain types of community issues? Who lives in the community? Is there a community center? Sometimes we're talking about places and locations, but in those places and locations, you can, find out who the voices are, who the leaders are of those local communities. And those are some of the first steps that you want to take when you want to do this relationship building. And then if there are situations where you have, colleagues or contacts, who know folks, get connected that way. But, just a little bit of time and investment in relationship building and trying to find out who people are, what their interests are, what motivates them to act can go a long way in terms of, building over a longer term relationships that could be very conducive and helpful, to collaborative research or, collaborative, work from a level of practice, as we talk about addressing many of the changes or many of the challenges associated, with climate change.
Thank you, Nataki. Amara, I was wondering, do you have anything to share on building relationships from the Sea Grant perspective? I know that is a critical piece of Sea Grant's mission as well.
I think that Sea Grant's approach is very similar to what Makeda and Nataki have mentioned, is having those relationships with the local personnel. Sea Grant is interesting that it has programs in every coastal and Great Lakes state. And with that, we have employees, we also have extension agents that are able to work within these communities and make those connections. And so, for example, one of the projects that I'll be working on this year, when I think of the communities that I need to reach out to in order to produce the podcast that is going to help to amplify some of the voices of the people in these communities, I automatically think of going to my Sea Grant program and knowing that they will point me in the right directions.
That's great. Thank you. I think that you have really hit on some key points of, knowing the right points of contact, the right people, asset mapping. I really appreciate all of these comments. This is something that is really helpful for me, trying to think about engaging with a variety of partners as well. Hopefully our audience feels similarly as well. So let's see, we have a comment here. Kimberly Andrews, asset mapping is a powerful and organized way to engage community members to identify the people, institutions, places, and stories that can be the foundation for mobilization and empowerment. Awesome. All right, well, let's go ahead and continue to kind of, personally, I would love to hear more from you all about your perspective on relationship building in this context. Are there specific, pieces that we can work for in our workforce development, anything else on this topic that you think would be valuable for our audience to hear about, and really start to think about, collaboratively, how can we address this? What are some of the key pieces we can work on?
And I think that one of the really interesting things that's been happening at Sea Grant is the way that we are looking now at approaching the way that we put out fellowship, scholarship, job applications, the way we word things so as not to exclude people. And starting at that just initial point in thinking of how will people perceive what we're saying, what we're asking for, who are we excluding by using a certain kind of language. For example, with the Canals Fellowship, are we penalizing people who may have come from lower income communities for not having a certain set of experiences because they had to work 2 jobs to get themselves through school? How are we what skills are we valuing, and do those skills necessarily always have to come from academia? How are we measuring what is really valuable in the people that we want. And especially for a program like the Canals Fellowship, which is a really, it's a pipeline into NOAA. A lot of Canals Fellows currently work with NOAA. And how do we make selections? How do we open this opportunity so that we can create the diverse workforce that we are committed to developing? What about international students? How are we attracting them to these programs? How do we train them and then retain them? Are we making things accessible? So I think just starting with the idea of how we are engaging people. Sea Grant also has a community engaged internship program where underserved or underrepresented students have the opportunity to work with NOAA offices, and they gain that experience that they may not have had the opportunity to do so. And then how do we continue moving them forward after that? Again, it's not parachute science. It's not a parachute program where you drop in, you said you did a thing, you can get a sticker for it and move on. It's how do we keep that moving, and how are we intentional through every step of the process to make these goals happen?
Thank you so much, Amara. I really appreciate hearing your thoughts on again, coming back to the concept of pipeline and the importance of language too and description, right? There could be some nuances there that we're not even thinking about that might be not creating an inclusive call to applicants. I would be curious to hear, Nataki or Makeda, if you guys have any perspectives on this as well, specifically in terms of thinking about workforce development and JEDI principles moving forward in order to, start to think collectively about, creating a more inclusive workforce for stronger engagement overall.
We've definitely been thinking about it a lot at NOAA at many different levels. One of the places where we have had this discussion quite a bit is with some of our employee resource groups. There's one in particular at NOAA called, we call it DPOG, affectionately, the Diversity and Professional Advancement Working Group. And the way that we have thought about workforce development is through this lens of recruitment, retention, and advancement, right? So yes, it's important to pour into the community. It's important to do that good work on the grassroots level. But when we start thinking about the pipeline, there's definitely a continuum across which you're working. And as both of the panelists have also mentioned, this is work that must maintain momentum. It has to keep going, and so, to ensure that you not only recruit diverse faces that are more representative of the public that we serve, we also have to be mindful of the culture that they're going to meet when they arrive at these institutions, when they arrive at these agencies, because that is going to be the determining factor in whether or not they're going to stay and whether or not they're going to bring that innovation and that new way of thinking and share it and allow it to better the work that you're doing. And so it means kind of like really taking a fine-tooth comb and beginning to go over the policies that are a part of your organization. How does your organization treat families, for example? A lot of us are not only caring for small children, but also aging parents, right? What sort of flexibilities and accommodations are there to allow for that? What sort of voices are speaking the loudest at the table? And are there other voices that are reaching in and pulling up and elevating others so that you're sending that signal that, my voice is not the only one that's important, but there are others around the table that also should be brought in and considered as well before we make a final determination. And then finally, advancement, right? What does our leadership look like? It's one thing for leadership to say, yeah, we really want to have a diverse workforce, right? It's also equally impressive for them to say, you know what, I've done this for a while. I'm going to step to the side so that other voices can step in. I'm going to make sure that where we have employees that are doing an amazing job, that are connecting with the community, that are helping to further our mission, that they are able to, that there's a clear pathway for them to move through the agency. Where there are leadership and development programs, we are able to access them. A leadership program we have at NOAA is called LCDP, is the Leadership Competency Development Program. And we recently worked to actually like revolutionize it in a sense. Up until this point, the program was only open to employees that were at a certain grade level, at the band 4 or GS 14 sort of equivalent. But after doing some analysis, what we found was that, where the bulk of our diversity was at one step below, right? So what we effectively had was a bit of a ceiling or a bottleneck that was preventing our most diverse staff from actually getting into this pipeline that we hoped would help to make an impact on the future leadership of the organization. And we were able to do some work and really get to a point where what we said, where we're widening the door, right? We're not lowering the bar, we're just widening the door. And so I hope to give you all some updates about how that is going. But it's those sorts of endeavors, right? Looking at what are the requirements to join, looking at the data, who has been represented, what can we do to shake that up? It's a lot of work, but I'm really encouraged by kind of seeing so many instances of folks kind of doing that tough job of digging deeper and making sure that we're doing what needs to be done so that our actions are reflective of what our words are saying, right? Because often those are not aligned.
I really think that Amara and Makeda have really covered this so well. But if I could just, maybe emphasize something that I heard Makeda talk about with respect to organizational culture, I think that's really important. Wearing my educator hat, as someone who, teaches and trains, college students and tries to connect them to opportunities in, this field, sort of broadly speaking, what those students encounter, kind of in the workplace or in the agencies or organizations that they go to work in, play a role in whether or not they stay, whether or not this feels like something that, is going to be sustainable for them. On one hand, the work might be engaging and interesting and might, kind of check off all of the boxes in terms of, what these students, or graduates at this point want to do, or even interns, right? What they want to do. But if that organizational culture doesn't feel welcoming, if they are always the only ones who look like them, then they have to make decisions, about whether or not they want to be that pioneer or not, or are we talking about agencies and organizations that have a culture that is not only have a workforce that is, reflective of the diversity that we see in this country, and have a culture that is welcoming to a wide variety of folks from different backgrounds. And so that tends to be, something that's critical in terms of, the roads that students, will travel down, and or, graduates of certain programs will travel down. So I think that's really important to emphasize. And just, investments, I think, in HBCUs and other minority serving institutions is critical. Glad to know that Amara is at Savannah State. I actually had a student who just graduated who was a fellow with NOAA, and she had a really, positive experience. But making sure that, there are opportunities, especially across HBCUs and MSIs, is critically important. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, all three of you, for sharing those perspectives. Those are some great ideas to consider creating a more inclusive space. As scientists, I think having different ways of thinking about science is important, and having different people of different backgrounds also a way to facilitate that. So we have a question here from Mark Greasy in the chat. So kind of reflecting on what good extension and outreach looks like, specifically within Sea Grant. Do you all have any perspectives on ways to go about identifying groups who, suggestions on groups that Sea Grant should be working with, who should they be reaching out to, and how do they identify who they may be overlooking?
I think the asset mapping that Makeda and Nataki talked about earlier is going to be super helpful with that. You know who you're working with, and they are a part of the community, and therefore they know other people within the community, and they may be able to point you in the direction of more people to work with. Outside of that, it's doing the research and doing the work, looking up who is affiliated with who and what their values are. Does that align with what we're looking to do? That's what I have.
Thank you, Amara. I think that is a great approach, right? One thing I've heard is, finding that a gatekeeper or a contact who can help you identify other groups as well. Makeda or Nataki, do you have additional thoughts on suggestions of ways to identify groups that extension and outreach professionals can work with?
I think Amara hit it. Look for those folks, do that asset mapping, figure out who you're already connected to, who might have connections, with the communities, ask for introductions. But in doing that, just make sure that you're transparent about, what it is that you want to do, why you want to engage with folks, why you want to meet them, and come with humility. I can't tell you how many times, since I kind of wear a couple of different hats, I have my community hat, but, also my academic hat. And sometimes wearing that community hat, I'm on the receiving end of, outreach, from folks who want to work with the organization that I'm affiliated with. And sometimes, unfortunately, we've had some folks to come and not really come with a spirit of humility, but with this, idea that, what I'm trying to do is gonna, it's going to, help you and benefit you so much that you should, kind of drop everything that you're doing and, be attuned to my needs and attuned to my last minute requests to work with you, when I've got something that has a, pretty significant deadline and I want you to, kind of sign on the dotted line and say that you're going to collaborate, before we've even really had an opportunity to get to know each other. So, understand that, you should come with a spirit of humility. Also try when possible. And I know that, sometimes, maybe it, we kind of get down the road and, you are where you are, but where possible, try to begin to develop those relationships before you have an ask, a specific ask, of those communities. If you can, begin to build those relationships before you really want to try to extract something, or ask those communities to do something, then that will go a long way in terms of, building those relationships. Even if okay, I'm going to have a project next year sometime, it's not really time for it, but, along this process of gearing up for it, I want to get to know some folks in the community and see if this is of interest and see if, folks want to collaborate and, try to do that as much as possible.
The one thing I'm going to add on here is to consider what your reputation is in the community in which you are situated. Because in the same way that you're going to be checking out and learning the community, they're going to do their research as well, right? And so let's just say, I'm based in DC, I say that I do all this great community work, they're going to start checking around. And when they find out that, oh, hey, she has not been engaged, we don't know who she is, she hasn't been to any meetings, or she hasn't presented at a school, or whatever it is, right? That's going to leave an impression as well, right? So, I feel like I often say, like charity begins at home, right? So the work and the efforts that you're doing should first be reflected right around you immediately, and then kind of use it as a guidepost for how you engage elsewhere, as Nataki and both Amara have shared.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing those perspectives. I think we are coming up on time, and I want to kind of honor that. So let me just say thank you to our panel speakers for taking the time to share your expertise, your perspectives with us all today. This was a really enlightening discussion. Thank you to our audience for your active and engaged participation. There are going to be a few more additional panels over the next few days on this topic. But with that, I will go ahead and just say thank you and see if Mona has any closing words for us as we wrap up day one.
Thank you so much, Brenna, for moderating that discussion. And thank you, Nataki, Amara, and Makeda for your inspiring remarks. I know I'm reflecting on the work that I do and how I will change given, in light of what you said. So thank you again for everything. I will close out by reminding everybody that Georgia Climate Conference is happening this year, everyone. Get energized. This is going to take place on August 12th and 13th. On Jekyll Island. The deadline to submit posters is June 1st, and the conference organizers are accepting presentations on all topics related to mapping, invasive species, resilience, agriculture, education, weather, water, climate, and the mix. So please, if you haven't seen this already, please consider submitting a proposal, a poster to the Georgia Climate Conference. So I will stop sharing this, and I will, because I'm so inspired and I like poems, I'm going to finish with one poem for all of you. This is one of my favorite poems. It's by Mary Oliver, and it's called The Summer Day. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? The grasshopper, I mean. The one who has flung herself out of the grass. The one who is eating sugar out of my hand. Who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down. Who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? So with that, we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you for your time and attention. Bye-bye.